Thank you very much, Stephen. I think the last time I spoke to a meeting with so many people was about 1986 or 87 or something, at the Labour Party conference, when I was moving a resolution for troops out to the north of Ireland. And as soon as I got up to move this motion, half the audience walked out. So I'm glad you're not all walking out tonight when I get up and sort of speak. And of course I also remember around the same time, last time I shared a platform with Bernadette when we were launching another book, 20 Years On, which was 20 years after 1968, when it all kicked off, so to speak. I suppose that sort of perished thought will soon be 50 years, which is another sort of anniversary which we can all reflect on and think back on and wonder what was achieved and what wasn't. But this is about 1916, so I want to quote, if I can, what James Connolly wrote, as I sort of started this meeting tonight. What James Connolly wrote, and this was about 2 weeks before the Rising. This was in, as I say, 2 weeks. And he wrote this in his sort of paper, Inter of Ireland. And he said, "Nothing warms the cockles of my old heart so much as when some British socialist kind-heartedly approves of my attitude, approves of it except, or but, or only for." So I want to make it clear, before I say anything else, that this evening, as a socialist living in Britain, I stand 100% behind the Rising, and the commemoration of the Rising and the comrades who fought there. And there's no ifs, no buts, no except fors. I'm not going to speak a great deal about the details of the Rising, but I will, if you like, summarise, in my view, what it was about. And first of all, and most sort of clearly, it was against British rule in Ireland. It was a rising against that. It was also a rising against the Great War, or the First World War, and against the slaughter of ordinary working class people in that war. And the declaration of Connolly and Pearse and so on and so on, that Irish people should not be part of that war. And it was also a rising against the then political leadership of Ireland, John Redmond and the Nationalist Party, who in 1914 agreed to accept the British offer, if you like, of Home Rule, very limited Home Rule for Ireland, a divided Ireland, and again Irish participation in the Great War. There was a rising against that, and this is the old thing that lots of people who said the Rising was a sort of violent reaction and so on and so on. In many ways, it was a rising against the Great War as well. And it was also, of course, a rising for a new and different Ireland. And Name's already mentioned the idea that the charge the children should be, which of course has never been achieved in sort of Ireland, north or south, to this present day. And indeed, it hasn't been achieved in many other countries either. But it was a vision, and it was those visions, it was those aims which, as I say, I tried commemorating the day and saluting and saying that those people who fought and died in 1916 were comrades of ours. Now, it must be said that not many people in England or in Scotland or in Britain or in Wales at the time saw things that way. And it's the reaction of people in Britain which I want to speak about mainly this evening. Although obviously we will touch on many of the aspects of the Rising. And it would be the easiest thing in the world for me to sit here for the next, or stand here for the next 15 minutes and sort of tell you of the horrors and the nasty things and the horrible sentiments which were said about the leaders both of 1916 and the Irish Revolution which followed, especially from 1918 to 1921. But I'm not going to do that, or at least not very much, because obviously I will touch on that. Because I think we should try and be inspired by those years. Inspired by the Rising itself, but also be inspired by those in Britain who offered solidarity with that revolution, and the Irish Revolution, which I judged started from 1916 to 1921. And they swam, if you like, against the tide of opinion within this country, which was obviously opposed to the aims of the Rising and the Revolution which followed. I just want to give you a couple of examples of that tide of opinion which came from the left, because obviously you could talk about the English government and so on and so on. There was an example of a left-wing Scottish newspaper called Forward, which was to the left, if you like. It was a sort of Labour left, if you like. And Forward was a newspaper from which James Connolly had written on numerous times and expounded his theories and his views on nationalism and socialism and so on and so on. It's a paper based in Glasgow. And Forward described the Rising as badness, or both. And that, if you like, is somewhat representative of what many in the British Labour movement, and indeed also among the Irish in Britain, thought at that time. And there was another example, which is far to the left of Forward, a magazine called The Socialist, which was the magazine of the Socialist Labour Party. And James Connolly was the first National Secretary of the Socialist Labour Party when he was living in Glasgow. And the week after the Rising, or a month after, 2 or 3 weeks after the Rising, the Socialists came out, and what did it say about 1916? It said not a word. And it didn't say a word the following issue. And it didn't say a word the issue after that. And it was 3 years before it carried an obituary of James Connolly, its own National Secretary, first National Secretary. And the reason, of course, because the Socialists, which was, if you like, what one today would call a far-left magazine. The reason, because they couldn't understand why a socialist would throw in his or her lot with what they thought was simply a nationalist rising. And again, as I say, all, in my view, they had to do was to read James Connolly's writings. So that, if you like, was the tide. It was the tide not just of obviously the main Labour Party and the main, it was the tide of a lot of the left as well. And it was also the view, for instance, of the main newspaper of the Irish in Britain at that time, called the Catholic Herald, the main one which the Irish people read, which described the Rising's leaders as crazy fanatics. There were those, however, and this is what point I want to make, there were those who swam against that tide. For those of us of you who were out to the launch of my book last week, I had a launch of the book last week, and there is a little slight repetition here, and I apologise for that, but I think some things are worth repeating. So the people who swam against the tide in 1916. And first of all, I introduce you to Patricia Lynch. And she was a young Irish woman living in London at the time. And she wrote this article called Scenes from the Irish Revival, which was a marvellous piece of revolutionary reportage. And it was based on Lynch's visit to Ireland immediately after the Rising. And most of this article, which again made it quite exceptional for its time, was based on interviews with working class women. And anyway, Lynch actually wrote her own views and her own conclusions, and she said this at the end. She said, "Poets and dreamers do not make revolution. There must be popular unrest behind even the smallest revolt. It is impossible to Dublin for men and women of the working class to live like human beings. Out of every 6 children born, 1 dies. Can we wonder that the high-spirited men and women, seeing their wrongs so ignored, have allied their discontent to the lot of political reformers? Now that appeared in a newspaper called Woman's Dreadnought, which was edited by Sylvia Pankhurst, of the famous Pankhurst family. Although that time she'd broken with her mother and her sister, essentially over Ireland. And Sylvia Pankhurst in the previous issue had written, "Justice can make one reply to the Irish rebellion, and that is the demand that Ireland should be allowed to govern itself." So here are Lynch and Pankhurst getting to the heart of the matter. Again, a lot of people in 1916 said, "Oh, these Irish rebellions are all poets and visionaries and dreamers, and they don't know anything about what's going on at the grassroots." And Lynch showed that the rebellion did have the social economic base to it. And of course, Pankhurst said the overwhelming message, no buts, no ifs, no except for, the overwhelming message was that Ireland should be allowed to govern itself. And as the time went by, as 1916 sort of faded slightly, and the next 4 or 5 years, the Irish situation took a different turn. It was this question of Ireland being allowed to govern itself totally, without conditions, the 32 counties, which became the major issues and the major bone of contention against the British government at the time. And there were again many in this country who resisted that demand that Ireland should be allowed to govern itself. But again, there were those who chose a different path. And again, I want to mention some of those. And first of all, there's an organisation called the Irish Self-Determination League. And this was formed in Manchester in March 1919. Now, you might not have heard of the ISDL, and it doesn't feature greatly in histories either of the Irish in Britain or in working class history, although it was an absolutely almost 100% working class organisation. But it deserves recognition. By November 1921, it had just over 300 branches in England and Wales, with a membership of 40,000. It didn't organise in Scotland for various reasons. And by this time, it held large meetings in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Rochdale, Blackburn, Preston, London, of course, and many other places. It organised large demonstrations. One night in April 1920, in support of Irish political prisoners, they had a hunger strike here in the prison here. It brought 10,000 onto the streets in London and 10,000 in Manchester, and thousands of others in such towns as Bolton, Bradford, and Tyneside. And all this, the fact that it was continually harassed by the special branch and so on. Its general secretary was arrested, its secretary was arrested, its treasurer was arrested, its admin staff were arrested, and many of these were reported to Ireland where they were interned. But despite all this, the ISDL played an important part in mobilising the Irish in this country. And again, obviously, by this time, from 1919 to 1921, the mood both among the Irish and indeed among many of the ordinary working people in this country, the mood had changed from the hostility of 1916. And certainly, by mid-1920, an important anti-war movement had been built. There were millions of people here who were opposed to what they saw their government was doing in Ireland at that time. And a mass anti-war movement actually grew up. And this again is something which is important to recall. Because although we speak about the fight in Ireland itself and the struggle which is being waged there, the repression and the terrorism, in the words of the British Labour Party, terrorism that the British forces were waging in Ireland at that time produced a mass reaction against that. And it's important to recall that. In this moment, I just give one or two examples of that. First of all, there was this one called the Councils of Action. Now, the Councils of Action were formed in the summer of 1920 by the Labour Party and the TUC. They were formed to stop British intervention against the Russian Revolution and to organise strike action if necessary, any attempts of the British state to say anything of intervening against the Russian Revolution. But by the time they all agreed to meet and met, so on and so on, that threat had disappeared almost. So what were the Council of Actions doing? And what happened was that many councils of action turned the attention to what was happening in Ireland. And from all over the country, local councils demanded that the Labour movement does something about what Britain was then doing there. And they called for strike action to secure British withdrawal from Ireland. And all across the country, which is Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, 78 local councils of action passed a resolution calling for a general strike to stop what Britain was doing there. Now again, there were over 300 councils. And sort of also that was not a majority, but it was a significant minority. And indeed, an official of the National Council said, who didn't obviously support these things, "I do not know who is communicating this resolution to Labour parties and trade councils, but I venture to suggest it has been too readily accepted by these bodies." In other words, the leadership was obviously totally opposed to what was going on. But again, it's important to recall this. Although the majority of people did not express their opinions, there was a significant minority in this country who actually were opposed to what was going on. And it's a tradition which we should be proud of. And there were those who went further than passing resolutions. For instance, in January 1921, 400 miners at Givenagh Colliery near Glasgow staged a 24-hour strike against what they said was British terrorism in Ireland, and they demanded the withdrawal of all British forces. But before that, in 1920, in the spring of 1920, about 3,000 doctors in Liverpool staged a 4-day strike in support of Irish hunger strikers in London, a strike organised by the ISDL. And in London itself, when the ISDL demonstrators in support of those hunger strikers were attacked by local thugs and by the forces of law and order, a local branch of the National Union of Railwaymen demonstrated in solidarity with the ISDL and the prisoners. Then in February 1921, when 3 railway workers were shot by the British forces in Cork, two of whom were members of the trade union ASLEF, the leadership of that union said they would call a general strike unless the British agreed to an inquiry into that. And at that point in time, the leadership of the trade union movement nationally and the leadership of the Labour Party panicked and eventually forced ASLEF to withdraw that threat. But all this eventually forced the Labour Party to act, and they organised a campaign on Ireland and held 130 meetings up and down the country, again exposing what the British government and the British forces were doing there. And it was, said the party leadership, who had been been very lukewarm about taking this issue of Sir Ireland up. One of the most remarkable series of meetings by any political party on any great public question in the history of this country. Now, all of this, I think, we can be inspired by. But we can also learn from failures, because of course, in the end of the day, none of this was enough to sway the British government or put pressure on the British government to give what the Irish people themselves wanted. That was a totally independent and 32-county country. So we have to ask ourselves, why not? And the Irish Transport and General Workers Union said, Labour's fatal obsession with the responsibility of empire, unquote, was the reason for this. In other words, it was to an imperialist party, because they could never grant Ireland self-determination, total self-determination, total independence, because it meant the break-up, they saw, of the British Empire. And they were attached to the British Empire. And that is a lesson. Of course, the British Empire is largely being gone now, but of course, new empires, of which Britain was involved, have taken its place. And one would certainly argue for the last 15 years that Labour's obsession with usurped empires has again held that back. And there are also those to the left, if you like, of the Labour Party, who again, to go back to what I spoke of earlier, could not understand why Connell was there, and didn't really think that they wanted to make Ireland a major question. Reason because, of course, they said the revolution that was taking place there wasn't socialist. So therefore, why should they bother about supporting it? And so they all went to, the British communists went to Moscow in 1920, for a meeting of what was called the Congress of the Communist International. And they met the leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution there. And they said, look what we're doing. We've got organizations in Britain fighting to stop British intervention in Russia in support of your revolution. And the Bolshevik revolutionaries turned around and said, what about Ireland? What are you doing about Ireland? And they sort of, one suspects, sort of looked at their shoes, you know, and said it's very difficult. Difficult. And they said, we will judge you. And this is what sort of Lenin or Lenin said, says every middle-class liberal person opposes British intervention against Russia. What they don't do is oppose what your government is doing in Ireland at this time. And he says, we will judge you by how many people, how many communists, with a small c, are jailed in Britain over agitating over the Irish question. And the truth is, there weren't very many. Actually, the business manager of Workers' Dreadnought, the Pankhurst paper, was one of the few who actually was. Because he was alleged to try and smuggle guns into Ireland at that time for use of the volunteers, the IRA. So John Maclean, the great Scottish socialist, came back from this Congress with the words, if you like, the Bolsheviks in his ears, and he wrote this. Sorry, it's a couple of sentences long, so I have to read it out. He said, the Irish situation is the most revolutionary that has ever arisen in British history. But unfortunately, lads who fancy themselves the only revolutionists are too stupid, or too obsessed with some crusade to see with sufficient clarity the tight corners the Irish are placing the British in. The Irish Sinn Féiners make no profession of socialism or communism, but they are doing more to help Russia and the revolution than all the professed Marxian Bolsheviks in Britain. And that, in a sense, comes back to the words I quoted earlier about Connolly. For John Maclean, there was no ifs, there was no buts, there was no except fors. And that again, to an extent, I think, because we have to draw different lessons. We draw different lessons of what is happening today in this country, in Europe, in the world. And the question is, both Maclean and the mission of Connolly is worth repeating. And essentially it is this: solidarity first, second and third, and ifs, buts and except fors very, very low down. And that applies to things like, say, the junior doctors in this country, the struggle of the refugees internationally, the struggles of the Kurdish people to form their own state, the struggle of the Egyptian people to win back their revolution, the struggle of Irish women to control their own fertility. These are the questions. And of course we could say, yes, but this, you know. The message of Connolly and the message of John Maclean is not to say yes, but it's to say solidarity. And that's why, if you like, the best way we can remember the people of 1916 and those who followed them is to quote the words of another international socialist called Joe Hill, the American Joe Hill. He said, "Don't mourn, organize." Thank you.
Don't mourn, organise. And there are two reasons for doing things like this. Yes, you want to mark a very significant revolutionary anniversary. You also want it to be a catalyst to go out and do stuff tonight, tomorrow, and this weekend. And on Sunday, the 13th of March, there's, I think, one of the most important demonstrations we're going to be seeing in London between now and the summer, because for working class people, and especially young working class people in particular, the biggest issue they're facing is housing. And this government is determined to destroy council housing. They want to transfer everything into the hands of the private sector at extortionate rents. So there are leaflets for this at the back on one of the tables. 13th of March, national demo to defend council housing. Meet at Lincoln Inn Fields. And that brings us very nicely on to Ken, who made probably one of the most important films about housing and two of the most important films about Ireland.
It's a real privilege to be here, and I'm going to speak for a few minutes because I'm very interested to hear the historical background to what 1916 from Jeff. I'm particularly interested to hear Bernadette's take on what's going on in Ireland now. So I'm the interlude, really. And first of all, to say, particularly to discuss 1916, because this year we're going to hear a lot of revisionism about 1916. It was just an adventure, it was irresponsible, it had no hope of success, it was a distraction, and so on. But to me, it was an essential step in the struggle for independence. And it wasn't a wild adventure, it was absolutely essential and inevitable and right. You mentioned mobile phones at the beginning. If they'd had a mobile phone, maybe they wouldn't have countermanded the order to rise up in the other parts of Ireland, and then we might have had a bit more of a success. But maybe I hate mobile phones, but maybe mobile phone or two at the time, would have been quite handy. It was a huge event, and it goes without saying, the bravery and the commitment and the ideas of those who were there have left a mark that I think few events can match. I just want to say a couple of things, really. First of all, as the only person from this side of the water, I think, on the platform, a couple of points from the perspective on this side of the water. I think it's important to say that the violence over the centuries has been done by the British to the Irish, and that what we are told and what we receive, it's too late to pass the message on now, comrade. What we are told is that it's the Irish that are the terrorists. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we're used to hearing this, and we take it for granted, and the news sort of washes over us, and yes, we say, well, it's all propaganda, and we don't fight it. And I think it's really important that we do challenge it, because it's the context in which everybody, apart from people who are concerned about it, and maybe people here, but it's the context in which people in general view what is happening. And they see it where terrorism equals the IRA or Republicans, and they forget, or they're not told, or they don't know, that of course the terrorism was the British. They forget about Carson, they forget about the British Army, they forget about the mutiny to install partition and so on. And the violence was done to the Irish people. And I think that that's a basic building block of our understanding of what went on. And of course we get examples of this all the time. And it's very subtle, it's very nuanced. It's in the people you hear interviewed. It's in the questions they're asked. It's the subtext of every interview. And just to give one example of which I guess you've all heard or listened to. But in the story last week of the Irma bomb, where the last suspect was freed. I mean, a terrible, appalling event, of course. But it was routinely described as the worst atrocity of the Troubles. The worst atrocity of the Troubles. There were, I think, either 29 or 31, depending how you count them, people killed and 220 injured. A terrible event. The Dublin and Monaghan bombs, which of course you will probably know about, in 1974, actually killed 34 and injured 300. But they were planted by the UVF, and the British Army and security forces have been implicated. They are not mentioned. That is now, comparing two appalling atrocities, is not very attractive. But why on earth would you say that one that killed 31 was the worst atrocity when the British were responsible, or the Loyalists were responsible for killing 34? Why? Why? Are they ignorant? Do the journalists not do the research? No, it's part of the knowledge, it's part of the understanding that has to be passed on. And that's the context in which we judge it. And it's permanent, and it's consistent, and it's part of the mood music whenever Ireland is discussed. And I think we have to challenge it. We have to fight it. We can't just let it happen. We have to oppose it. There's numbers you can ring. There's demands we have to make, because otherwise it just continues and continues. We expect it from the press, and the BBC flaunts its objectivity, but of course it isn't objective, it is the voice of the state. And that's I think that should be part of our demands of the new Labour leadership, that when they develop a media policy, the role of the BBC in perpetuating myths like this have to be challenged. And it's very well saying, yes, we defend public service broadcasting, but we don't defend lies. And these are lies. The second point I want to make was that Ireland was where the British learned to be imperialists. It was the first colony, and there's a remnant of it still, which makes it probably the last. For 700 to 800 years, the process has been inexorable. And you can see it, and the pattern was repeated in all the other colonies, and it has a pattern. First of all, you steal the land, and you impose the taxes. Then you put down every opposition brutally, with violence, with ritualized killings, with slaughter, absolute violence. Then you install settlers to rule on behalf of the absentee landowners. And then you provoke sectarianism, maybe on a religious basis, or for whatever, in whatever way. Provoke sectarianism to keep the independence movement divided. And then, of course, you enact laws that keep the people from that country subjugated, so that there are laws to prevent them taking part in the governance of their own country, or making any significant inroads into the wealth of that country. And then finally, you fight the independence movements with every ounce of strength you can. And finally, the last trick is when the independence struggle looks like winning, you make certain you pass the political power onto people you can do deals with. So in other words, you split them, which is what the old-class warrior Churchill and his cohorts did, was when they proposed the treaty, they phrased it in such a way that it would divide the Republicans, and then they armed the people they wanted to do a deal with to attack and slaughter their opponents. And that's the process of imperialism. And they learned it in Ireland. And they're still learning it, and they're still practicing it. And as I say, every item of news about Ireland reinforces that. I mean, you can see it. You can see it in a way in South Africa, where the ANC began as a communist with a communist set of ideas, and Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. Then they got independence and big business rules, and Nelson Mandela is a saint. And it's not rocket science, is it? So those were substantially the 2 points I wanted to make. The third is a question, really, which is how do we best honour the memory of the people who fought in 1916 and gave their lives in the independence struggle. And again, I thought I wouldn't be the first to quote Connolly. You beat me to it. But the remark I particularly like is, we cannot conceive of a free Ireland with a subject working class. Well, the working class, if you look at the austerity programme, is certainly subject to the constraints of the economic system. It's the working class that suffers from the bad housing, the poor public services, the unemployment or the casualisation of work, and it's the same as we have here. Now, how do we pursue that? What political demands can we make? I think there is, and I don't know if everyone will agree with this, but I think there is a possibility now, with the change in leadership in the Labour Party, to make demands of that leadership. I think we know that John McDonnell has spoken in support of Irish republicanism, and I think we have to hold him to that now. I think we have to hold the Labour leadership to that. We say, don't back down. You know, let's give our support and demand that the Labour Party speaks out for the Republican struggle in Ireland. And if if there is a point when the people of Ireland feel that they are entitled to vote again on whether that country should be united, that should get our absolute 100% support. And interestingly, I think it's in 3 years' time, will be another century commemoration, which is when the Irish people did vote for independence across the whole of Ireland. And I think it was an overwhelming vote. Was it 80%? 85%. So there's an anniversary we can look forward to. 3 years' time, let's commemorate the one vote that was taken by the whole of Ireland to vote for a united independent country. Let's support that. And of course, the other way in which we can show solidarity is to fight alongside the people in Ireland against austerity, for homes, for the common ownership and democratic control of the commanding heights of industry, for the utilities, the defence of public services, the end to privatisation there, the end to subcontracting, and for a new economic order, and ending with James Connolly, how could we not? The cause of Labour is the cause of Ireland, and the cause of Ireland is the cause of Labour. And we can stand for the cause of Labour.
So if Ken was the interlude, this is the commercial break. Socialist Resistance, it's organising 3 things in the next few months. First thing is a topic of endless fascination. The European Union